House will be in order. The clerk will report the words.
Every single member of this institution, Democratic and Republican, should join us in condemning the president's racist tweets. To do anything less would be a shocking rejection of our values and a shameful abdication of our oath of office.
The chair is ready to make a statement. I came in here to try to do this in a fair way. I kept warning both sides, let's not do this, hoping we could get through. Mr. Jayapal had a situation where we could be in here on another motion to take down words of a friend of mine, but we don't ever want to pass up, it seems, an opportunity to escalate, and that's what this is. I'll dare anybody to look at any of the footage and see if there was any unfairness. But unfairness is not enough because we want to just fight. I abandon the chair.
I'm going to accept this.
The House will be in order. The chair is prepared to rule. The chair is prepared to rule. The words of the gentlewoman from California contain an accusation of racist behavior on the part of the president, as memorialized in Daschle's Precedents, Chapter 29, Section 65.6, characterizing an action as racist is not in order. The chair relies on the precedent of May 15, 1984, and finds that the words should not be used in debate. What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion at the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Collins of Georgia moves that the words of the gentlewoman from California be stricken from the record.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. No. The nays have it.
Speaker, I request the yeas and nays. Mr. Speaker,
The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are ordered. All those in favor of that, please rise. Obviously, a sufficient number having arisen. The vote will be taken by electronic device. The yeas and nays are ordered. 15-minute vote.
On this vote, the ayes are 190, the noes are 232. The motion is not adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
The House is not in order.
The House will come to order. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi, be permitted to proceed in order.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. Ruling of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry. The inquiry is that this resolution is
Is the gentleman seeking a recorded
vote?
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this will be a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the ayes are 231, the noes are 190. The motion is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The gentlewoman will be allowed to proceed in order. Chair announces the remaining time in the debate. The gentleman from Georgia has 9 1/4 minutes. The gentlewoman from Texas has 19 minutes. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 1 minute to the Minority Leader, the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy.
It's for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, on page 1 of the original Thomas Jefferson Manual of Parliamentary Practice, he writes that it is the very material that order, decency, and regularity be preserved in a dignified public body. Now, we all have the awesome privilege of serving in that dignified public body. This, the People's House. Our American democracy and its institutions, they're looked up to as an example for the entire world. And Jefferson's emphasis on order and decency is just as important today as it was more than 200 years ago. Unfortunately, that was not the case today. Madam Speaker, today is a day that historians will write about. It is a sad day for this House, the People's House. Our rules of order and decency were broken today. And worse, the House just voted to condone this violation of decorum. Madam Speaker, I know there's frustration in this body. But it is our duty to focus not on retribution, but on building a more perfect union. We can be doing so much more, and we should be doing so much better. Madam Speaker, I would ask that all members take it upon themselves to uphold the dignity of this institution. Let us preserve and promote those ideals of order and decency that this body was founded upon, and that this body will need if we are to address the many challenges facing our nation. Madam Speaker, it's not just our nation who is watching, the world is watching us. I hope we can rise to the occasion. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure, Madam Speaker, to yield 1 minute to the distinguished member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentlelady from California, Ms. Bass. 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the world is watching and the world is in shock. Today I rise to speak in support of this resolution condemning the hateful rhetoric of Donald Trump. His comments were beneath the dignity of the office of the President of the United States, and they have no place in our country. My 4 colleagues he attacked have every right to be in the United States. They are just as American as any one of us. And it's shameful that the leader of our country would seek to disparage them for political gain. But the sad truth is that if we were to pass a resolution every time Donald Trump said something offensive, little else would happen in Congress. For that reason, this moment has to be about much more than condemning Donald Trump. This moment has to be about moving our country back toward its best values and ensuring that every American, regardless of origin, race, or sex, has an opportunity to succeed. The American people want to see us fighting for jobs, health care, free elections, and policies that recognize the humanity of all who seek refuge in our nation. As chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, I remember when the President said to Black America, "What do you have to lose?" When the leader of this nation attacks 2 of our members, 2 of the 4 women are members of the Congressional Black Caucus, what we have lost is a president that has dignity. Can I have a couple more seconds?
Time's expired.
I'm happy to yield the gentlelady 15 seconds.
Someone that has the capacity to bring our country together is what we have lost. But even for this president, this is a new low. Using rhetoric against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's race is superior. Since the president will not lead, we must. I yield back the balance of my time.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The chair will, in case anybody forgot, remind everyone in this House on both sides of the aisle that the rules will be strictly enforced for the remainder of this debate. And members are advised to think closely about their words, particularly when referring to personalities. Gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, the distinguished Democratic chair of the Democratic Caucus of the House, Mr.
Gentleman is
Jeffries.
recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, our diversity is a strength. It is not a weakness. We are a nation of immigrants, some voluntary, others involuntary. But as Dr. King once observed, we may have come over on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We're a gorgeous mosaic of people from throughout the world. We are white, we are black, we are Latino, we are Asian, we are Native American. We are Christian, we are Jewish, we are Muslim, we are Hindu. We are believers, we are non-believers. We are gay, we are straight. We are young, we are older. We are women, we are men. We are citizens, we are dreamers. Out of many, we are one. That's what makes America a great country. And no matter what xenophobic behavior is coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we will never let anyone take that away from us. Not now, not ever. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Reserve.
Reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure again, Madam Speaker, to yield to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have an opportunity today to condemn or condone. Birtherism is racist. Saying a Mexican judge can't be fair because of his heritage is racist. Saying immigrants from Mexico are rapists is racist. Saying there were good people on both sides in Charlottesville is racist. Calling African countries shithole countries is racist. And telling 4 members of this body to go home is racist.
Gentleman will state his.
Do you think it's not racist?
Gentleman will state his point of order.
Do you think it's not
So
racist?
the gentleman will suspend. Gentleman will state his
Is that
point
what
of
you're saying right now, Mr. Collins?
Gentleman will suspend.
Mr. Collins, is
Gentleman
it not
from-
racist to say these things? Because you can say that right now.
The gentleman from California is out of order. The gentleman from gentleman from California shall suspend. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia
I
rise?
make a point of order that the gentleman's words are unparliamentary, and I request they be taken down.
Clerk will report the words. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I will withdraw an offensive word.
And I will withdraw my point of order.
Objection.
And may I have an additional 30 seconds?
Gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
Madam Speaker.
The gentleman.
The chair controls the time. The gentleman has 30 seconds remaining. Does the gentlelady wish to grant him an additional 30 seconds?
I am prepared to grant him additional 30
The
seconds.
gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I now withdraw my point of order.
Gentleman withdraws. Gentleman may proceed. 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, we have an opportunity today to condemn or condone. Birtherism is racist. Saying a Mexican judge cannot be fair because of his heritage is racist. Saying immigrants from Mexico are rapists is racist. Telling 4 members of this body to go home because of where you believe they are from is racist. There is racism coming out of the White House. There is racism coming out of the White House. So where will you stand today? That is the question we face. Where will we stand? Will we stop and extinguish the flames of racism from the White House, or will we continue to fan them? History and our children are watching, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield as much time as you may consume to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Gentleman's recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. The last vote that we just saw on the House floor is beneath the dignity of the House. We have rules for a reason. Just because one party is in the majority, Madam Speaker, doesn't mean that the rules don't apply to them. The rules apply to all of us. Just as we're passing laws here that ought to apply to all people fairly across this country. The reason we have these rules is so that we can rise above the fray. We have disagreements on this floor. What's great about this country is we have the ability to come and battle over the disagreements. But we shouldn't get into personality conflicts on this floor. We shouldn't be trying to accuse people of one thing or another disparagingly on this floor. That's why we have these rules, so that we can actually debate the issues that people care about. Rather than engaging in this constant barrage of personality attack that we've seen week after week after week, the American people expect us to be spending our time up here fighting for the issues they care about. They want us to be spending time focusing on lowering their prescription drug prices, lowering health care prices, rather than this foolishness. They want us to be solving the crisis at the border, not ignoring it, not disparaging it, but actually focusing on solving it. And these are easy issues for us to solve if we come together and spend real time in good faith working on them, rather than this foolishness. Look at all of the other problems that our country faces, that people call on us to address. They expect that we're spending our time up here focusing on those problems, getting our economy back on track like it is now. It took people working together, and it's working. We can do more. Fighting the evils across this world, when you look at what Russia's doing, when you look at what Iran's doing, when you look at what China is doing, us to be coming together, standing up and working on those problems for the people who sent us here. Not worried about ourselves, not fighting amongst ourselves, but actually focusing on their problems. That's why we're supposed to be up here. That's why the rules of the House should apply to all people, not just selectively to some. And with that, I yield back the balance of my
Gentleman
time.
yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure to yield to the distinguished gentleman from California, Representative Lieu, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am an immigrant. I'm a person of faith, and I served on active duty in the United States military because I love America. Yet throughout my life, I've had people tell me to go back to China or Japan or North Korea. And like many immigrants, when I get that go back insult, it is hurtful. It makes me feel like I don't belong here in this country. And make no mistake, when people tell me to go back to where I came from, that is a racist insult because it's based on race. If I was white, they would not tell me to go back to China. I experienced that insult because my race happens to be Asian. But the good news is that Americans at record high levels support immigrants. We are not going anywhere. America is our home, and I will still be standing here long after the occupant of the White House leaves. Yield back.
The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that you're here as guests of the House, and any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
My pleasure to yield to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington State, Representative Jayapal, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am appalled at the statements coming from the White House telling people who dissent that somehow you should go back to your country if you criticize the United States. Well, let me remind you that dissent is patriotic and, in fact, a core value to our democracy enshrined in our Constitution. And yes, I am a proud naturalized citizen born in India, a proud patriot, a proud person who belongs in this country. And it's not the first time I've heard go back to your own country, but it is the first time I have heard it coming from the White House. And frankly, Madam Speaker, I am appalled that on this floor, my Republican colleagues would call any of us anti-American. That is why this vote is so important, because we have to let the rest of the country know that the House of Representatives will stand up for the Constitution, represent and defend every single person in the country, regardless of the color of their skin or the country of their birth. Madam Speaker, my Republican colleagues have been talking about patriotism, about love of country. One of them said, love it or leave it. But what is love if not to make what we love better through our critique, our work, and our service? That is what real Americans do. We do not stifle dissent, we do not otherize or sow hatred, and we certainly never say, go back to your country, to a brown or a black person, because that is a racist trope. I hope that every single member of this chamber, Republican and Democrat, will join me in rejecting the President's message and vote in support of this resolution. That is the American thing to do. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
Please, Madam Speaker, to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Representative Dean.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, words matter. Decency matters. Recently, President Trump told 4 congresswomen of color to, quote, go back to their home countries. Mr. President, they are home. 3 of these congresswomen, my colleagues, were born in the United States. The 4th, also my colleague, is a naturalized U.S. citizen. They are as American as I am, as the President is, as the First Lady is, or anyone else, period. Telling people who look different to go back for where they came from is a refrain laced with hate. This rhetoric is neither new nor a surprise, but that doesn't mean we can allow it to stand. And it belies a fundamental misunderstanding of our nation's promise that we are all created equal and that everyone has a role to play in building a more perfect union, not just white Americans, every American. We hereby recognize these words for what they are: offensive, hateful, and the people we represent deserve better. As a co-sponsor, I believe we must call out hate wherever we see it, whether in our own houses or in the White House. I urge all members to support the resolution. Words matter. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentlelady from Texas.
I'm pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Representative Lewis.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise with a sense of righteous indignation to support this resolution. I know racism when I see it. I know racism when I feel it. and at the highest level of government, there's no room for racism. It sows the seeds of violence and destroys the hopes and dreams of people. The world is watching. They are shocked and dismayed because it seems we have lost our way as a nation, as a proud and great people. We are one Congress, and we are here to serve one house, the American house, the American people. Some of us have been victims of the stain, the pain, and the hurt of racism. In the 50s and during the 60s, segregationists told us to go back when we protested for our rights. They told ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns to go back. They told the innocent little children seeking just and equal education to go back. As a nation and as a people, we need to go forward and not backward. With this vote, we stand with our sisters. Three were born in America, and one came here looking for a better life. With this vote, we meet our moral obligation to condemn hate, racism, and bigotry in every form. Thank you.
Gentlemen need more time?
Thank you for the time.
Gentleman yields.
Let's do what is right, what is fair, and what is just.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Reserve.
The lady from Texas.
I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Representative Ryan.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
We, the people, a more perfect union, the common defense, general welfare, common good. These United States, the words and phrases of our founding documents were about unity. Were about us coming together against the political and economic concentration of power. Division is the enemy in the United States today. We are unraveling before the very eyes of the American people. And I believe that this president, that the White House, does not want to talk about the issues facing the American people today. 75% of the American people live in paycheck to paycheck. Seniors paying $1,000 a month in prescription drugs. Students drowning in student loans. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to inquire. I'm done as far as ready to close if you are.
We're prepared to close.
Thank
The
you.
gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I will not belabor this. I have made many of the points that I have said before. I think this was rushed to the floor. I think this is what happens, unfortunately, when things are rushed. There are things that need to be done, and this decorum of this House is important. We've had a long lesson of that today. The very essence of the resolution, which has issues beyond, needs to be considered. And when we do this, then I think, as I said in my opening, and I'll stick by what I said then, that this needs to be voted down. This does not need to go forward, and we need to get to a certain time when we are back to literally doing the people's business. This is the third time, Madam Speaker, that I've been on the floor doing this. Third time. More time than I've done on immigration, more time than I've done on any other bills, more bills that could actually get signed into law. As my whip just said just a few minutes ago, there are things we could actually sit down and find common ground on. But it seems like common ground is gone. There are some of us willing to reach our hands across the aisle and say, let's find common ground because people are hurting. Why don't we solve those? Instead, we continue to seemingly want to go to the press release or to the political statement, which is frustrating. I understand. But we've got to get better. We've got to look at this and say, what happens to the American people? What happened to the people who sent us here, who are looking at this and saying, what do we need to do to make our lives better, not the lives in this body? When we understand that, that is when we come together. That's when we take the decorum of this House. That's when we find ways to actually speak as friends to each other who have been elected to serve a common purpose. That is our higher aim. And when we degrade that, we are not being honest with ourselves. So let's get to the people's business. There's budget issues looming, there's caps looming, there's debt ceiling looming, and there's still problems at our border that is a crisis. And these need to be fixed. Let's take up those bills. Let's have honest debate. I'll put a bill up, you put a bill up. Let's do what we're supposed to do here. Have markups. Let's run through things through committee. Let's take seriously what we said to do. We've both at times as parties have been guilty of not doing that. Let's focus now, at least where we are now, and say this is not the way forward. This is not where we need to be because of the many problems inherent in the resolution itself, but also the way it was brought to us. And we've seen that play out on the floor today. Is that really how we're going to leave it with the American people, that rules can be broken and then nothing done about it? Is that really where we're going to be, that we're not going to bring issues to the floor that can be discussed, that have been brought through committee, that actually affects people's lives? That's the frustration I have, Madam Speaker. But time for debate on this needs to be done. We need to vote no. We need to move forward. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas.
Madam Speaker, the way to move forward is by voting yes on the underlying resolution. To paraphrase the Declaration of Independence, it is indicated that we all are created equal with certain unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is immigrant and non-immigrant. That is an individual whose religion you believe in and one you do not. That is a lifestyle that you may not know and understand. It may be a race or ethnicity that you have never come to be able to accept. But in this nation, the 13 founding colonies, fleeing persecution, were described as creating an experiment. It was not a perfect experiment. There were some of us who came to this nation in the bottom of a belly of a slave boat. There were some that were indigent servants. And many came by boat. Some walked across a border that has created havoc. But they were people desperate for freedom and the right to make their lives better. We can account for those people by the history books and the decades of heroes and sheroes who have come in a different skin, a different religion, a different basis. They've even put on the uniform of this nation because they love this country. I'm reminded of the era of Dr. Martin Luther King, the many miles he walked with the soldiers, the civil rights soldiers, and his early book that said, Why We Can't Wait. And so I join with the idea that we must work for the American people. We must provide for the increase in the minimum wage and good health care and education. But at the same time, there is something in this nation that our children demand that we do. And that is, what are the values of the red, white, and blue? What are the values of those stars that represent the many states of this nation? The values are that we are a nation based upon laws, morality, and values, and a love of country, due process, equality, and justice. And it means that every single person must have their fundamental right of respect. This resolution is simply that. It is a fundamental right to respect and dignity. In this instance, for 4 members of the United States Congress from Boston, from New York, from Minnesota, and as they go on to their places, it is very clear that they must have the respect that is respecting of this particular Congress. And so this resolution, these 4 women are no less deserving of dignity than anyone else. And this resolution is simply one that is to seek not condoning, as was said, but a condemnation of attitudes that may parlay racist beliefs. No one stands for that. And we cannot go on to all that is good without saying to the nation and the world that this is not good, It is not America. We will not accept that as our definition because we do believe in the creation of a more perfect union. And so I conclude by saying we condemn the hurtful and offensive comments that demean immigrants and people of color, especially if those comments originate from the White House. And what we will do today is to accept the challenge of Dr. Martin Luther King, a peacemaker, man of hope, and we will say why we can't wait, because the nation calls upon our higher angels, and that is what we will do when we affirm this resolution on behalf of the people of the United States of America. With that, I ask my colleagues to vote for this very important resolution, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the previous question is ordered on the resolution and the preamble. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All in favor say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to.
Madam
For what
Speaker,
purpose does the gentleman? Oh, for what purpose does the gentlelady from?
I ask for recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote. Yeas are 240, the nays are 187. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. House will be in order. Members will take their conversations off the floor. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intention to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows. Impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States, of high misdemeanors. Resolved that Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is unfit to be president, unfit to represent the American values of decency and morality, respectability and civility, honesty and propriety, reputability and integrity, is unfit to defend the ideals that have made America great, unfit to defend liberty and justice for all, as extolled in the Pledge of Allegiance, is unfit to defend the American ideal of all persons being created equal, as exalted in the Declaration of Independence, is unfit to ensure domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare, and to ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, as lauded in the preamble of the United States Constitution, is unfit to protect government of the people, by the people, for the people, as elucidated in the Gettysburg Address, and is impeached for high misdemeanors, that the following article of impeachment be exhibited to the Senate. Article of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives of the United States in the name of itself, of the people of the United States, against Donald John Trump, President of the United States, in maintenance and support of its impeachment against him for high misdemeanors committed as president, constituting harm to American society, to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Article 1, the House of Representatives on July 16, 2019, strongly condemned President Donald Trump's racist comments that have legitimized and increased fear and hatred of new Americans and people of color by saying that our fellow Americans who are immigrants and those who may look to the president like immigrants should go back to other countries, by referring to immigrants and asylum seekers as invaders, and by saying that members of Congress who are immigrants or those of our colleagues who are wrongly assumed to be immigrants do not belong in Congress or in the United States of America. In all of this, the aforementioned Donald John Trump has, by his statements, brought the high office of the President of the United States in contempt, ridicule, disgrace, and disrepute, has sown seeds of discord among the people of the United States, has demonstrated that he is unfit to be president and has betrayed his trust as president of the United States to the manifest injury of the people of the United States, and has committed a high misdemeanor in office. Therefore, Donald John Trump, by causing such harm to the society of the United States, is unfit to be president and warrants impeachment, trial, and removal from office.
A resolution offered from the floor by a member other than the majority leader or the minority leader as a question of the privileges of the House has immediate precedence only at a time designated by the chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed. Pending that designation, the form of resolution noticed by the gentleman from Texas will appear in the record at this point. The chair will not at this point determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. That determination will be made at the time designated for consideration of the resolution. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the Intelligence Authorization
Without
Act.
objection. Pursuant to House Resolution 491 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 3494. The Chair will appoint the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 3494, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2020 for intelligence and intelligence-related activities of the United States government, the Community Management Account, and the Central Intelligence Agency Retirement and Disability System, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. General debate shall be confined to the bill and amendments specified in the first section of House Resolution 491 and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes, will each control 30 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Along a wall in the upper lobby of the CIA headquarters building is a large picture of the head and torch of the Statue of Liberty, accompanied by the following words: "We are the nation's first line of defense. We accomplish what others cannot accomplish and go where others cannot go." These 2 sentences distill the essence of America's intelligence community and the quiet sense of mission that tens of thousands of our fellow citizens bring to their jobs every day. H.R. 3494, the Damon Paul Nelson and Matthew Young Pollard Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal years 2018, 2019, and 2020 is our contribution to the work of the IC. This is a bipartisan bill reported unanimously out of the Intelligence Committee and embodying the collective efforts of Democratic and Republican members. Though H.R. 3494 contains many new initiatives authored during my chairmanship, it also preserves provisions developed during Ranking Member Nunes' tenure as chairman as well. Despite disagreements over the Russia investigation, the committee has come together to support our intelligence community. HPSCI oversees highly sensitive, highly classified activities, and we collaborate with the IC to ensure that it has the resources and authorities necessary. At the same time, HPSCI must ensure that legal and policy constraints are vigorously enforced. That requires us to maintain both a professional distance and a healthy skepticism about the activities we oversee. When warranted, the committee must impose additional checks and limitations at times over intelligence community objections. It is a delicate balance which the HPSCI strikes through use of many different oversight tools. The most important by far is our annual Intelligence Authorization Act. H.R. 3494 gets the balance right. It authorizes funding for the IC at roughly 1.4% above the President's budget request for the coming year. It prioritizes the IC's collection and analytic capabilities against China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, while sustaining critical intelligence capabilities that support counterterrorism and counterproliferation. The bill also ensures that the men and women of the IC have what they need to collect and analyze the intelligence that policymakers require. At the same time, H.R. 3494 ensures close oversight by Congress, rejecting the funding of legacy IC programs with overseas contingency operation resources or OCO funding, and requiring for the first time the submission to the intelligence committees of detailed information on unfunded IC programs. Another provision, authored by Representative Welch, calls for more information on the IC's budget for counterterrorism matters to be released to the public, consistent with the protection of national security. Still another authorizes the Public Interest Declassification Board, which plays a vital role in ensuring that historical documents about IC programs are declassified appropriately. The legislation is especially strong in three other areas. The first has to do with foreign malign activities, including those by Russia. The bill calls for extensive IC reporting and creates new notification requirements regarding covert or overt efforts by foreign governments to undermine trusted institutions or to interfere in the democratic process, our own or those of other nations. This bill also strongly supports the IC workforce. H.R. 3494 obliges the IC elements to offer their employees 12 weeks of paid parental leave on top of the unpaid leave already guaranteed to them by law. Other language ensures that the families of CIA personnel who are killed or injured as a result of wars, hostile acts, or other incidents can be appropriately compensated. The bill also bolsters the IC's ability to recruit, hire, retain, and promote a workforce that represents the diversity of the nation that it serves. Lastly, technology. Many have sounded alarms about the rise of so-called deepfake algorithms and the transition in our country and elsewhere to a fifth-generation telecommunications network. To help the IC address both challenges, H.R. 3494 instructs the DNI to hold competition and award prizes for cutting-edge research into deepfake and 5G technologies. H.R. 3494 is not perfect. It is the result of negotiation and compromise. But I'm pleased that despite our public differences, we've once again been able to put those aside to focus on the important work of overseeing the intelligence community. The result is a strong bipartisan bill, which I am proud to support. Let me conclude by thanking Ranking Member Nunes, my committee colleagues, and the entire HPSCI staff for their collaborative efforts. I urge all members of the House to join me in voting for H.R. 3494. Before reserving the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, we request unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the bill. and I reserve the balance.
The gentleman's request will be covered under general leave. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of H.R. 3494, the Damon Paul Nelson and Matthew Young Pollard Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal years 2018, 19, and 20. Passing an annual intelligence authorization bill is the most important tool Congress has to conduct effective oversight of the intelligence activities of the United States. Today, Chairman Schiff and I are bringing the 10th consecutive intelligence authorization bill to the floor. I am pleased that, as in years past, this bill is a bipartisan product that reflects the contributions of all the committee's members. It was reported out of the committee by a unanimous voice vote. This legislation is the product of bipartisan work by the majority and the minority and provides the intelligence community the necessary resources and authorities to ensure the ICE remains capable of protecting and defending the United States. The bill folds in many priorities from FY 18 and 19, including the defense of elections from foreign threats, enhanced injury benefits to CIA employees, and bolsters intelligence oversight by providing the ICE accountability to Congress. Additionally, the bill protects all CIA covert intelligence officers' identities, establishes a paid parental leave program for the IC, and mandates counterintelligence briefings and notifications to the intelligence committees by the FBI on a quarterly basis and prompt notification when an investigation is carried out regarding a counterintelligence risk related to a federal election or campaign. This bill supports critical national security programs, particularly those focused on countering threats from hard targets such as China. Lastly, the bill continues to ensure that the dedicated men and women of our intelligence community have the funding, authorities, and support they need to carry out their mission and to keep us safe. With that, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in support of H.R. 3494. As the United States learned in 2016, there are few things more important to our democracy than ensuring that our electoral system is kept free from outside interference. We also have a responsibility to educate our partners, our allies, about the threat from foreign interference, as well as share our best practices with those nations that face similar threats. Taiwan, one of Asia's most vibrant democracies, is acutely aware of the risk posed by foreign influence. The Chinese Communist Party, angry that another nation has the audacity to prove that a culturally Chinese democracy can thrive, will stop at nothing to degrade Taiwan's political independence. This year's Intelligence Authorization Act requires the Director of National Intelligence to report on influence operations China conducts to interfere in Taiwan's upcoming 2020 elections and find out what assistance the U.S. government provided to counter these operations, and provide a comprehensive list of the specific organizations that conducted these influence operations. The U.S. is in a unique position to share the tools and techniques with others that we are implementing to safeguard our own democratic elections. In line with our obligations under the Taiwan Relations Act, we urge the administration to do all it can to assist Taipei with creating the conditions for a free, fair, and secure election that is free from interference. This provision brings us one step closer to that goal. Thank you. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield as much time as she may consume to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. I'm proud to rise in support of this year's Intelligence Authorization Act. After the recent partisan NDAA debate and vote, it is an accomplishment that this committee came together to produce a bipartisan bill that supports our intelligence community and provides the warfighter with the intelligence support needed to protect the United States and our allies. I'm particularly pleased that this bill contains the Counterintelligence Accountability Act that I introduced earlier this year that I wanted to take a moment to highlight for the American public. This bill amends the National Security Act by requiring the FBI to provide quarterly counterintelligence briefings to the Congressional Intelligence Committees, which is not only necessary for us to conduct meaningful oversight over the FBI's counterintelligence operations, but also provides the American people with the comfort that the FBI is subject to the same types of scrutiny as other intelligence agencies. Importantly, this bill also mandates that the FBI notify the Congressional Intelligence Committees when the FBI has a counterintelligence investigation open related to a CI risk to an election or campaign for federal office. And given former FBI Director Comey's testimony in 2017, I'm still deeply concerned that the FBI failed to provide notification to the Congressional Intelligence Committees regarding the investigation opened into the Trump campaign in 2016 until well after the election. This bill ensures that Congress is kept fully and currently informed with these types of counterintelligence activities. This is good, accountable governance. I appreciate the Chair and Ranking Member's support in adding my legislation into this bill and urge my colleagues to vote yes on final passage. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm proud to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Heck.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the chair of the committee as well. I rise to strongly support the Damon Paul Nelson and Matthew Young Pollard Intelligence Authorization Act. You know, in the last year, we've made some pretty incredible progress in reducing the security clearance backlog. Yet, frankly, after all the progress we've made, we are still, and you're hearing this number correctly, nearly 500,000 people on the waiting list for security clearance, nearly 500,000. Earlier this year, the average wait time for a top secret security clearance was reduced to 468 days, down from 534 days. So in other words, when we're out there competing for young talent to come in and be a member of the intelligence community, say in a field such as cyber, we're told we have to tell them, cool your jets, we'll get back to you in a year and a half or so. Indeed, closer to home, my senior military advisor is a distinguished graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. He served not one but 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he had a security clearance. And yet when he joined the staff of the House of Representatives to again earn a security clearance, it took 20 months, nearly 2 years. We're losing good people when we subject them to that long of a wait time. This bill makes some progress. It will build on the progress we've made this year by providing needed reform to this mission. It creates a system of accountability and clear goals for how the process should run. Furthermore, the bill allows for innovation on using digital tools and reciprocity among agencies to improve our efficiencies when clearances are needed to be transferred from one agency to another. Our government can and must efficiently and effectively review security clearance applicants. We owe our national security workforce at least that much. This bill will help us to do that, to further reduce it so that the intelligence community can compete for the best and the brightest in a timely fashion. And for that reason, among many, I urge your support for the Intelligence Authorization Act. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes, is recognized.
We have no further speakers at this time, and I'm prepared to close, so I reserve the balance of my time.
All right, the gentleman reserves.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to Ms. Sewell from the great state of Alabama.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of H.R. 3494, the Intelligence Authorization Act. As the chair of the Defense Intelligence and Warfighter Support Subcommittee, I believe this bill will ensure our warfighters retain the information and decision-making advantages to which we have grown accustomed and improve the intelligence community's ability to attract and retain a diverse workforce. The bill includes provisions that authorize increased intelligence funding for combatant commanders and our growing strategic competition with China, Russia, and other malign actors, supports the Defense Intelligence Agency's ongoing assessments of its roles and missions, and provides the Director of National Intelligence with the necessary authority to manage intelligence community-wide academic programs. This bill also includes language I authored which would improve federal campaign election security. My provision would provide require the Director of the National Intelligence to work with the FBI and Department of Homeland Security to make available an advisory report on foreign counterintelligence and cybersecurity threats to those campaigns. Additionally, my language requires the Director to publish a summary of best practices and provide information to campaigns to help thwart these attacks. This legislation also continues the committee's longstanding and bipartisan work to promote increased diversity within the intelligence community's workforce. Our bill contains language directing the intelligence community to expand its annual demographic hiring report by adding grade level, years of service, career categories, gender identity, and sexual orientation reporting categories. These changes will improve the IC's ability to track how well it retains and promotes persons of diverse backgrounds. Finally, for the first time in many years, the Intelligence Authorization Act will provide significant funding for programs that will improve the IC's ability to introduce students from diverse backgrounds to its mission. I look forward to voting in support of this legislation. I want to commend the chairman and ranking member on working together to provide these important authorizations, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same and vote for this bill. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Reclaim the balance of my time.
I continue to reserve.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, and I want to thank the chairman of our committee for working with the minority to put together a bipartisan piece of legislation that serves our national security purposes. I also want to acknowledge both of the individuals for which the bill is named, but particularly Damon Paul Nelson, the former staff director for the then majority at the time, someone who I and my colleagues saw put his heart and soul into the committee, and someone who was able to keep many lines of communication that were necessary open during the committee during some of our most trying times, and this is a fitting recognition of his service to our country. As chairman of the Intelligence Modernization and Readiness Subcommittee, I celebrate this bipartisan bill and the patriotic young people who enter service in the intelligence community, sometimes immediately after college, despite extraordinary student debt. For that reason, we have included measures to enhance intelligence community-wide student loan repayment and forgiveness programs. Reducing the financial burden on intelligence community workers helps us recruit and retain a talented and diverse workforce to remain competitive with the private sector. To that aim, we have also included a measure to authorize 12 weeks of paid parental leave for intelligence community employees in the event of a birth or adoption. This authority would supplement the 12 weeks of unpaid leave currently afforded to intelligence community employees and other government personnel under existing law, sending a strong message to the intelligence community workforce that you do not need to choose between your career, serving our country, and your family. These provisions will help the intelligence community recruit and retain individuals capable of meeting the security goals of the United States and will set the example for other federal agencies seeking pro-worker policies. Our goal on the subcommittee is to anticipate the needs of the intelligence community workforce. Reaching across the aisle for our intelligence community is how we will secure a next-generation intelligence community workforce. And I want to again thank the chairman and yield back.
I thank the gentleman. It's now a pleasure to yield 3 minutes to Mr. Maloney from New York.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the chairman, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to offer support of this bill, which includes my legislation, the Greg Wenzel Clandestine Heroes Parity Act. My bill honors an unsung son of the Hudson Valley, CIA officer Greg Wenzel, who died in Ethiopia on July 9, 2003. He was only 33 years old. Greg was inspired to join the clandestine services after September 11th and dedicated his life to making the United States stronger in our fight against terrorism. That's what CIA officers do. They put their lives on the line for our freedoms, but because of the nature of their work, rarely get the recognition they deserve. This bill simply ensures that the families of fallen CIA officers receive the death benefits their loved ones earned laying down their lives in service of our nation. Greg was born in the Bronx and graduated from Monroe Woodbury High School in Orange County, New York. He went on to earn degrees from SUNY New York at Binghamton and Miami School of Law. After joining the CIA, he was assigned his first overseas tour as an operations officer in the Horn of Africa. The assignment was challenging, but Greg was known for his grit and good spirit. But after his death, Greg was awarded the CIA Intelligence Commendation Medal and the Exceptional Service Medallion, and you can find his star, number 81, on the CIA Memorial Wall in Langley. And we even honored his service in 2015 by renaming the Monroe, New York Post Office the Greg David Wenzel Memorial Post Office, which is the first such honor ever to be bestowed on a CIA officer. But even with these distinctions, Greg's family was never able to access the death benefits he had earned in life, because a loophole currently blocks benefits for all CIA officers who don't have dependents or who were not killed by a known act of terrorism. My bill simply changes that and rights this wrong. I'm so thankful to Greg's parents, Gladys and Mitch Wenzel, for never giving up on this fight. This bill is an opportunity for us as a grateful nation to honor Greg and his family and to honor all of our fallen CIA officers and the families they've left behind. Mr. Speaker, I urge all members to vote yes on this bill, and I yield back.
Does the gentleman reserve?
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our members who were to speak on the bill. If the ranking member has no further speakers, I'm prepared to close.
All right. The
I have a short closing, Mr. Chair, and then I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Very good. The gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes, is recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize myself for as much time as I may consume. Mr. Chairman, this year's IA is named after Damon Nelson and Matthew Pollard, two staffers who passed away unexpectedly last year. Matt Pollard was a staffer with the Senate Intelligence Committee and is remembered fondly by staff and members who had the pleasure of working with him. Damon Nelson was the former Republican staff director on the House Intelligence Committee and a personal friend. Damon would be happy with the bill today, and I'm happy that this committee was able to produce a bipartisan product. In closing, I want to take a moment to thank the men and women who serve in our intelligence community. I'm honored to get to know so many of them in the course of the committee's oversight work. I would also like to thank my colleagues on the Intelligence Committee for their contributions to our oversight over the past year. I would also like to thank all the staff of the committee for their hard work on the bill and their daily oversight of the intelligence community. In particular, I'd like to thank the professional oversight staff from the minority, especially Nick Clarente, Laura Cazelli, Megan Green, Andrew House, Lisa Major, Bill Flanagan, Steve Keith, Marissa Skaggs, Betsy Holm, Jack Langer, and Alan Souza. I'd also like to take just a moment to thank our fellow from Los Alamos National Laboratory, Scott Miller. Scott joined the committee in 2016, and in a few weeks will be finishing up his mid-career educational program with the House and will be returning to New Mexico. Mr. Chairman, I wish Scott all the best as he, his wife Rebecca, and daughter Sarah return home. All the staff members spent long hours working on the legislative text and its classified annex, and the bill is stronger for it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Chairman Schiff and all of his staff for the bipartisan work product, and I yield back the balance of I urge passage of 3494 as amended and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized to close.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. I wish to say only a few words of recognition before concluding my remarks on the Intelligence Authorization Act. First, to my HPSCI colleagues, and I remember HPSCI's Damon Nelson and CISI's Matthew Pollard, two dedicated staffers and public servants who passed away last year. The legislation is named in their honor. I also want to express my tremendous thanks and support to the men and women of the intelligence community. You strive quietly and tirelessly every day, and your work helps keep the nation safe. I greatly appreciate the work of Ranking Member Nunes, as well as my other HPSCI colleagues. And I'd be remiss if I did not recognize these members of my staff who worked tirelessly together with their minority colleagues to produce this bipartisan legislation. Wells Bennett, Timothy Bergreen, Maher Battar, Carly Blake, Patrick Boland, Chris Breaux, Linda Cohen, Thomas Eager, Will Evans, Patrick Fallon, Daniel Goldman, Abby Grace, Nicholas Mitchell, Daniel Noble, Deanna Pilipenko, Lucian Sikorsky, Conrad Stows, Kathy Suber, Amanda Rogers-Thorpe, Aaron Thurman, Rianne Workala, Rafaela Wakeman, and William Wu. One more personal note. I want to recognize the exemplary contributions of Brendan Smith, who's been a member of HPSC's staff for 18 years. Brendan has announced he'll be leaving the HPSC soon. We are deeply grateful for his work and his longstanding and continuing service to the nation. Let me conclude by urging all members of the House to join me in voting for H.R. 3494 and in supporting the measure as it proceeds to the Senate and after that to the President's desk. And with that, I'm prepared to yield back the balance of my time.
All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall now be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence printed in the bill, the amendment in the nature of the substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee print 116-22, modified by the amendment printed in Part A of House Report 116-154, shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as an original bill for purposes of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part B of House Report 116-154. Each further amendment printed in Part B of the report may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report 116-54. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise as a designee of Mr. Burgess, and I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-154, offered by Mr. Stewart of Utah.
Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment is very simple. It adds the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committees to the list of committees that will receive a briefing from the Director of National Intelligence on emerging infectious diseases and pandemics. The Energy and Commerce Subcommittees on Health has jurisdiction over all public health and quarantine, as well as the Centers of Disease Control. Given the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate Health Committee's jurisdiction over the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response, which plays an integral role in our nation's public health and security, it is imperative that these committees be included in this briefing, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Purpose does the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment, although I am not opposed.
Objections. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The gentleman from Texas's proposal would allow the congressional committees with jurisdiction over public health matters the opportunity to receive a briefing about the effects of emerging infectious diseases and pandemics on national security and the international and political economic system, along with the Intelligence and Armed Services Committees. It's critical that Congress be well informed on the posture of the United States and indeed the rest of the world to address the public health crisis that might arise in the face of a particularly rapid spreading, devastating disease. It's crucial that committees that oversee public health responses understand how prepared we may be to address such a crisis. I support this amendment and believe it will be helpful to our colleagues on the House Energy and Commerce and Senate Health Committees to receive this briefing and information from the DNI, along with the Intelligence, Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and Appropriations Committees that are already included in the bill text. For that reason, I support the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
I thank the chairman for supporting the amendment. I urge adoption of the amendment, and I yield back my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Utah. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from It is now in order to consider the amendment number 2, printed in Part B of the House Report 116-154. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, again, I rise as a designee of Mr. Burgess and have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-154, offered by Mr. Stewart of Utah.
Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, my amendment is simple. It directs the Secretary of Homeland Security, in collaboration with the Director of National Intelligence, Chairman of the Federal Communications Commissions, and appropriate private entities to undertake an effort to remove or neutralize unauthorized international mobile subscriber identity catchers or cell site simulators installed by foreign entities or that have unknown attribution. International mobile subscriber entities, IMSI catchers, or cell site simulators, are devices used for intercepting mobile traffic and location data. They appear to be legitimate mobile cell phone towers, but nearby phone may connect to. Once connected, phones' locations can be tracked. Some advanced IMSI catchers can even read content such as messages and cell phone data. Much remains unknown about the proliferation of these devices, particularly in the National Capital Region. However, we do know that foreign actors have access to and have used these devices. It is imperative that our intelligence community, with the relevant agencies and private industry partners, undertake an effort to neutralize unauthorized IMSI catchers, and I urge support of this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Any member seek time in opposition? Seeing none, the gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Once again, I urge adoption of the amendment and yield back my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Utah. Those in favor say aye. The opposed is no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report 116-154. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-154, offered by Mr. Carson of Indiana.
Pursuant to the House Resolution 491, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Carson, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank Chairman Schiff, Ranking Member Nunes for the work on the intelligence authorization this year. It is always a pleasure to serve under Chairman Schiff's leadership. Without it, the Intelligence Committee would not have been able to pass such a strong bill out of committee. I rise today, Mr. Chair, in support of an amendment that I have offered to the underlying bill text. This amendment will help the United States protect the integrity of its economic supply chain infrastructure. I'm pleased that my good friend, Representative Elise Stefanik, has joined me in co-sponsoring this amendment. Today, businesses and organizations in the United States face an array of distinct and stealthy threats. The American supply chain is under repeated attack from foreign intelligence services, cyber hackers, and sophisticated criminal enterprises. Unfortunately, experienced adversaries often exploit vulnerabilities in American companies' technological infrastructure or weak links in their organizational supply chain so that they can steal their intellectual property, co-opt equipment from suppliers, damage software, or conduct surveillance. Moving forward, we must be more vigilant to stop them. The Carson-Stefanik Amendment, Mr. Chair, will guard against these grave concerns, and it will lead to stronger safeguards for the supply chain by mandating the National Counterintelligence and Security Center to produce a plan within 6 months to strengthen the supply chain intelligence function within the intelligence community. The plan, Mr. Chair, will identify personnel with the right expertise from the intelligence community workforce, outline budgetary and resource needs, and describe the necessary authorities and governance structure for future implementation of that plan. It will inform both the executive branch and Congress's efforts to enhance our defenses against exploitation of the supply chain. The United States remains one of the most technologically advanced economies in the world. Throughout the past century, America has enjoyed unprecedented economic growth because of the ingenuity of our people and the technological innovation that undergirds that entrepreneurial spirit. While that economic growth has not always been evenly distributed, and we are still wrestling with debates about economic inequality, surrendering our technological edge and innovative advantages to strategic rivals would pose a huge risk to America's future prosperity and security. I believe, Mr. Chair, it is very important to offer this amendment, recognizing the evolving and emerging threats to our nation's supply chain infrastructure. In a very rapidly developing global economy, the intelligence community must work to safeguard the core of what America and her competitive strength is: economic, intellectual, and technological ingenuity. My amendment proactively works toward that goal, ensuring that we stay on top of those varying threats to our supply chain infrastructure that emanate from strategic rivals. In addition to this amendment, Mr. Chair, I would like to highlight another important part of the base bill. This year's Intelligence Authorization Act includes an entire section on domestic terrorism. It is important that we acknowledge domestic terrorism as a very serious threat, and we must do more than just talk about it as a societal problem. We must act. Domestic terrorism incidents in the U.S. are on the rise, fueled by hatred, stoked by fear, and inspired by dangerous rhetoric. At a time when this president is ignoring the truth about domestic terrorism, and his administration is concealing and hiding the proliferation of white supremacist-inspired incidents, Congress and the public urgently need more information to better understand and prevent domestic terrorism. Specifically, Mr. Chair, this bill would require the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and NCTC to produce an annual report on domestic terrorism. And with the underlying report that is mandated in the underlying Intel authorization bill, we can better determine how to change the law and make the necessary adjustments to procedures and to adequately shift current practices in order to fully address the threat of domestic terrorism and its root causes. Much of the report, Mr. Chair, would be made available to the public, increasing transparency, while the full report would be provided to oversight committees in greater detail. It would be valuable information and would require an annual strategic assessment on trends and patterns.
Gentleman's time has expired.
And ultimately, it will dramatically expand the information on domestic terrorism available to Congress and the public. I urge my colleague to support the Carson-Stefanik amendment to the underlying bill. Thank you. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Acclaimed time in opposition. Being none, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report 116-154. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-154, offered by Mr. Hurd of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 491, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to join my good friend and fellow a former CIA officer, the gentlewoman from the Commonwealth of Virginia, to offer this bipartisan amendment that would direct the intelligence community to prioritize resources to address the humanitarian crisis at the border and in the Northern Triangle and also Mexico. I represent more of the southern border than any other member of Congress. The root causes of this current crisis are violence, extreme poverty, and lack of economic opportunity in the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Drug cartels, human traffickers, and human smugglers are making this crisis worse and putting innocent lives at risk. They profit while people in Central America suffer and entire nations are destabilized. Our intelligence community is not maximizing the use of our intelligence to deny and disrupt these operations. In June, we all know 104,000 people were detained at our border. Almost every one of them had a phone number of a smuggler, a license plate of a bus that brought them here, or a pickup location in their home country. Understanding and disabling these smuggling and trafficking networks should be a national intelligence priority. This amendment would require the Director of National Intelligence to conduct a review of intelligence collection priorities in the Northern Triangle and Mexico, and then provide quarterly briefings to Congress regarding the intelligence community activities in this region. These individuals and organizations threaten the security of the United States and the Western Hemisphere, and we should be using intelligence to stop them. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Purpose of the gentlelady from Virginia rise.
I rise to claim time in opposition, though I am not opposed to this amendment.
Without objection, gentlelady is recognized.
I am proud to introduce this amendment alongside my colleague, Congressman Hurd from Texas, himself also a former CIA case officer. Our bipartisan amendment, the Trafficking and Smuggling Intelligence Act, comes at a time of great hardship, violence, and heartbreak across Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries, and at a time of crisis at our southern border. The volatility in our backyard should be cause for serious concern. Here in the United States, we've experienced the devastating effects of the drug trade on the health of our citizens, and on our southwest border, we've witnessed how ongoing violence and instability in Central America is a driving factor for increased migration towards the United States. Our bipartisan amendment would require intelligence assessments of drug trafficking organizations, human trafficking organizations, and human smugglers across Mexico and the Northern Triangle. These would include reports that can be released publicly to the American people. Our amendment would direct our public servants to use their expertise to better understand the root causes of violence, instability, and migration. With these improved assessments from the DNI, we would be able to strengthen our national security in the face of threats from traffickers, smugglers, and other criminal organizations. Like so many of our colleagues, Congressman Hurd and I recognize that if we are to keep Americans safe while also responsibly addressing the situation at the border, we must address the conditions at the core of the instability we are seeing in Central America. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join us in supporting this amendment. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.